let's go ahead and finish our discussion talking about ecosystems. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to look at some of that energy associated with ecosystems. We'll talk about the sun, but we'll also talk about some of the energy associated with, we'll say, the life cycle of some animals and so forth. And you'll see what I mean when I talk about these life cycles. We'll talk about basically birth through the living portion through the death of it. So it's all about the food. Again, we have to have food in order to survive. Animals have to have some sort of food in order to survive, to get that energy to be survival or to go after its own food and things like that. Many different populations, they interact in that ecosystem. So as I said, some are helping one another, some are chasing after one another, some are hiding, but again, they're interacting with one another. Plants, birds, insects, squirrels, rabbits are just a few things you might see when you go around looking in your backyard. A plant, it's going to use that sunlight to produce its own food. Okay, through that process of photosynthesis. So again, you've got that sunlight coming down and it's taking that carbon dioxide, and when it takes that carbon dioxide through the chlorophyll and things like that, it's producing some oxygen, but it's also producing that glucose, that food that's going to be made from that sunlight. Now, while a grasshopper might eat on that plant for food, the plant's producing its own, but again, the grasshopper relies on that plant in order for it to be food. Producers, those are going to be any living organism that is able to produce its own food. Where things like the grasshopper, that's going to be something that's classified as a consumer. Organisms that rely on something else to get its food, like I said before in some of the previous videos. The cow's going to be eating the grass. The grass is going to be the producer, but the consumer is going to end up being the cow. I know it says relying on something else to get its food. We could talk about a tiger or a lion hunting another animal. So some consumers are so small that we don't even notice them. They are going to break down the dead organisms, and if it is something that is breaking something else down, those things are going to be called decomposers. A couple examples of decomposers, bacteria and fungi are going to be a couple different examples. Let's go ahead and look at some of the modeling of that flow of energy. You may have heard of something called a food chain. Again, when you think of chains, basically they are linked together. So when we talk about this food chain, again, it's going to be a series of events of this eating that and so forth, or where things are going to be getting their food from. It is a simple way of showing that energy flow from one organism to another. So again, we talked about the grasshopper starting off. So we've got the grass. Okay, grasshopper is going to eat that grass. Okay, maybe that bluebird eats the grasshopper. All of a sudden the snake eats the bluebird. The owl ends up eating the snake. If we want to talk about, things that are roadkill, things like that, or maybe, for some reason that owl dies, but all of a sudden you've got that dead organism. Okay, so all of a sudden you've got the fungi, you've got the bacteria that's going to end up breaking that organism down, but again, that's going to kind of become that fertilizer for the grass to grow again. So you can see this chain ends up circling on around, and it can continue on forever. So when we talk about food chains, there are different types of food chains. This is just one that's going to be very simple. A food chain, it doesn't show everything, but it is a quick, simple depiction of what is going to be going on. On page 634, your book shows another specific type of food chain. But again, it's just a small or a very small community that's going to be going on, or what's going to be eating other things in order to get that energy. Okay, so like I said, you've got mine, you've got the one also on page 634. As we go ahead and we talk about the cycling of material, okay, first thing I want to do is let's talk recycling, things that we're familiar with. Okay, sometimes down town you've got the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts that go ahead and do some of the recycling. They pick up the different types of plastics, they take the aluminum cans and things like that. So why do we do it? Basically, we do it so we're not producing waste. Okay, These are things that can get reused. We can take those aluminum cans, we can melt them back down and reuse them again. Maybe a pop can this time is going to be used as a different pop can. Maybe it's used as aluminum foil, things like that. You've got the plastic, different types of plastics that we can recycle. Again, we take them and we go ahead and we get them reused. Maybe what was a Clorox bottle is now going to be a Gain detergent bottle. Maybe this time it's going to be, put into a milk jug. So basically, we're reusing those things so we don't produce waste. Now, when we talk about an ecosystem, it's going to be very much the same thing, okay? For the same type of purpose. The bodies of living things, they're made up of water. They're made up of different chemicals like nitrogen, carbon. Basically, carbon is one of the main things in all living organisms. They use it for carbon dating, but again, there are other purposes for it. But we as individuals, animals, they have to maintain that healthy diet to ensure everything is going to grow and be healthy, continue to grow, survival of the fittest, things like that. So again, in an ecosystem, that matter is going to cycle through the food chain. The amount of matter on Earth is never going to change. It is just going to be recycled and used again and again. New animals are born. Again, you've got that food cycle going on. All of a sudden, things are going to die. It's going to get decomposed. All of a sudden, as it decomposes, causes more grass to grow, where some of those things are going to be eating that grass. So you continuously see that cycle or recycling of materials put into the earth to cause growth, to feed the other animals. And again, that food chain is going to continue on over and over. Living organisms, like we said, they depend on this cycle. They rely on one another for food. They rely on, say, those trees to continue to grow for shelter. They rely on those trees to be houses to squirrels and things like that. But everything is going to have its own unique role that, again, the circle continues to go around and around in order for that chain to continue, in order for that recycling of materials to continue, to maintain a well-balanced Earth, to bring it back to Section 1 so that biosphere, every single thing within it, is able to survive.